Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the first live stream from Azure API Center. I'm excited to have the product group with me. I'm Mike Budzinski. I'm a senior product manager for Azure API Center. We also have Julia. Julia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia. I'm a product manager here at Microsoft working for the Azure API Center team.
We also have Fernando.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. My name is Fernando. I'm also a program manager for API Management Service.
And Andre.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andre. I'm a product manager in Azure API Management team.
So thank you for joining us today. Please drop in the chat where you're tuning in from. We are excited to see all of our viewers from across the globe, know where you are. And yeah, let's dive into the session. It's our first community stand-up. We organized it to hear, to tell you what our opinions are on the direction of the API industry going forward, where it's headed in. You will also see what's new in Azure API Management and API Center. You will learn about the latest features that we added to our products and learn how you can leverage those features for your own benefit. It's also an opportunity for you to ask about our products and bring any questions or provide feedback in the chat, and we'll be closely monitoring that chat as well. And lastly, you're welcome to connect with other participants, users of API Management API Center, to learn from them and interact with them. As I said, this is our first community stand-up. We plan to organize the next one in June, so stay tuned for that as well. We'll start today with a short introduction, fireside chat about what's brewing in APIs, in the world of APIs. Then we are going to jump into the updates from both products, API Management and API Center. And we'll have a guest session after that, presented by Stefan Eiskens about deploying and chaos testing an active, global, resilient API platform. And we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. With that, the fireside chat, the question of the day that's probably on the minds of many of you is, what is the role of API management in AI workloads? And we're going to bring Andre here to the stage, who is our AI expert. So Andre, what's your opinion on the role of API management in AI workloads?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think it's important to remember, first of all, that OpenAI, or even like generally speaking, AI APIs, they're still APIs, right? So problems that apply to regular APIs, they still exist in AI APIs. Like you still want to do rate limiting, you still want to have security controls in place, you want to validate JOT tokens, but there are some special requirements when it comes to AI APIs, right? For example, when it comes to security controls, probably you don't want to share your API keys with all of your applications. And other stuff like analytics and usage metrics, lifecycle control. Like if you take a look at the Azure OpenAI, they release new versions pretty frequently, and that's something that you need to manage. And that's where you need API management platform to manage new versions, and also like give access to those people that use your APIs, right? So I think that's very important to have a platform in place.
Yeah. So basically, what I'm understanding from you is that AI APIs are sort of like other APIs in a way that you still want to manage them alongside other APIs, whether those are some cloud-native APIs, application APIs, integration APIs. You still want to monitor them. You still want to mediate them with policies. You want to secure them, protect them, potentially publish them internally for consumption or externally. So you still use all of the traditional capabilities of the API management solutions to manage those AI APIs. But on top of that, yeah, you said that AI APIs now, it's a fast-paced world, so they're still evolving. So there is a higher need for managing that evolution of those APIs. What about any AI-specific functionality? Do you foresee any of that?
Yeah, so it really comes down to like your environment. We see customers who just get started with, for example, Azure OpenAI. They have single application, they have single OpenAI endpoint, and they're pretty much in a good place because they maybe don't even need any specific OpenAI mechanisms in their API management platform. But as they grow their portfolio, now they have multiple applications. They might even have multiple OpenAI endpoints or AI endpoints in general. For example, in Azure OpenAI, you have this notion of provision throughput units. You have PTU instances. You have pay-as-you-go instances. And as you kind of grow your investment in AI, you become familiar with the challenges of managing those APIs. For example, as I mentioned, this authorization problem. When you have the one API key, you don't really want to share it with your applications. You want to store it securely in a platform like Azure API Management, right? The main kind of a currency that you have in the AI world, or especially in the Gen AI world, is tokens. So you want to precisely measure how many tokens are consumed by your applications, by your departments, by whoever built those applications based on your OpenAI environment that you have in Azure, or generally AI, whether it's like Llama model or Mistral or something else. So this is the problem of like token count. And then when you understand the usage, you also want to limit those consumers. So because you have a quota, again, I will take it as an example as Azure OpenAI, you have a quota in tokens per minute. And that is something that you want to share across your cross portfolio of your applications, and that's where you need mechanisms to apply those limits. It's just like rate limit for requests, but here you need to make it specific to tokens, and you need to understand how to work with tokens. And these kind of features, customers really need when it comes to OpenAI and intelligent applications broadly. Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. Can you think of any use cases where API management doesn't have a place in consumption of AI APIs?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there might be simple workflows, right? When, as I mentioned, we have customers who just getting started. They have single application, they have single OpenAI endpoint, and maybe that's where you don't really need API management platform, at least at this point. And I would say there might be some situations where you make an architectural decision that you have this kind of one-to-one relationship. You have one application, you have one OpenAI endpoint or Azure OpenAI endpoint where you manage quota, when you do the login, when you do the monitoring, where you track the usage of one particular application in one endpoint. Of course, in that case, you basically offload the complexity over to managing multiple OpenAI instances. But if that's the choice that you want to make, then probably you don't really need an API management platform in that case. But I would say in general, as your AI investment grows, you have multiple applications. And now you question yourself, how can I manage those tokens limits? How can I manage load balancing across multiple endpoints? That's where I would say API management solution is crucial.
Right, and I think even in simple cases, as you may start simple and small, but you may still foresee growth. And I think, in those cases, it's good to have established an architecture of API management right from the get-go so that you don't have to retrofit it and do all the migration work, because that might turn out to be more expensive in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so thank you, Andrei. I just want to mention that we will be having some AI-specific features coming up to the product as well. So if that's something you're interested in, please monitor our product updates in the coming months, and hopefully there will be some functionality that will be very useful to you. Thank you, Andrei.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Next, we wanted to highlight community contribution or community content around API management. There is a channel started by Massimo Kripa and Stefan Eiskens here on YouTube called API Hot Rod. It's a fresh channel with just 4 videos as of this week, but I'm excited to see the growth. I'm excited to see the content. They touch on very interesting topics, and these are very experienced API management users and customers. So if that's something that you're interested in, learning more about in terms of API management usage, architectural patterns, and some of the hot topics about API management, please check this channel out and give it a try. And now we'll jump into the product updates. We'll start with Fernando.
Thank you, Mike. So yeah, if you can click it, file 2 more times. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so one of the biggest updates that we have available for you is what we call the V2 tiers. More specifically, Basic V2 and Standard V2. So these tiers represent quality of life improvements that customers have been asking for a very long time, especially things like faster deployment, faster scaling, and faster configuration. As you're aware, when you deploy API management, especially the V1 tiers, you can take up to 45 minutes for deployment. You can take up to 30 minutes for scaling, and adding some configuration can also even take from 15 to 30 minutes, some certificates or networking configuration. So in the case of the V2 tiers, we're revamping all of those times. You can try it right now in the Azure portal. If you deploy standard V2 or basic V2, it's almost immediately, but basically it will take 5 minutes maximum. So that's a huge improvement for customers to try API management and to start playing with all the functionality that we have available. Also, in later updates, we will allow you to have availability zones by default. It's going to be high redundancy, high availability without having to add any more scale units. And also eventually we will have multi-region for standard V2. Another advantage of the V2 tiers is that networking is going to be way more simpler. In the case of standard V2, we will allow you to do what we call VNet integration. Again, it's going to be super fast, and you don't have to configure any network security group or any outbound rules for our own internal dependencies. So it will be seamless virtual network integration. And we're planning in the inbound side of the API management also to bring private link. So eventually with standard V2, you will have private link in the inbound and VNet integration in the outbound. Another advantage of these tiers is going to be pricing flexibility. Pricing will still stay the same as the classic tiers, but there's also an advantage with standard V2. If you have been playing with V1 tiers, you know that Premium V1 has a very nice discount. After the first unit of the Premium V1, you get a 50% discount. This same kind of discount will apply for standard V2. After the first scale unit of standard V2, you will also get, in this case, a 30% discount on the next units of standard V2. So we're making it more easier and more cheaper to scale out in the case of standard V2. And also just be aware that we have a Premium V2 coming very soon. Premium V2 will have the best performance, best throughput, and also will have another kind of a VNet injection that will be more seamless and more easy to use. And just to finish, last thing, basically, next week we're going to release the general availability of basic V2 and standard V2. So stay tuned. Next week you should be able to play with this in GA for basic V2 and standard V2. So thank you, Mike. Take it away.
Thanks, Fernando. There is a question in the chat. Is that a temporary discount or forever?
So it's basically forever. If you go to our pricing page right now, you can see this discount for standard V2. Basically, you deploy standard V2, the first unit is around $700. The second unit and above is going to be $500. So you will have a discount. It's going to be forever, based on the second unit, right? Scale unit.
Yeah, I mean, forever, as long as it's pricing, basically.
Yeah.
And there is a second question from Sidarat. Let me show it up here. The entry-level standard V2 pricing will increase from $700 when multi-region is added, or the J price next month will stay stable for a while?
Yeah, that's a great question from Siddharth. So multi-region will be introduced in a later update, not during this GA, but basically how multi-region works is that you need to add another scale unit, we call it, in another region, and you have to pay for this second scale unit. This second scale unit is the one that is going to cost with $500 with around a 29-30% discount. So that's basically how it works. When you add a new unit, it's basically you're adding a new region that will get a discount. So you pay for the number of units or number of regions. And
Right.
the GA price will stay stable for a while. Yes, that's correct.
So exactly the same way it works today in the premium tier.
Exactly.
Perfect. I don't see any more questions. So thank you, Fernando. And now we are going to talk a little bit about workspaces in API management. So what we have seen our customers adopting API management, or like the models of using API management in organizations, is we historically supported two models. The first model of API management is the centralized API management model, in which case organizations have a single API management service that they have multiple API teams deploy and manage their APIs into, and then there is a single API platform team that manages that service, manages infrastructure, and also manages all the deployments, automation, and even conflicts between the teams who edit the APIs, in some cases even access control. So because there is so many teams interacting with the API management service, publishing the APIs, that API platform team becomes a bottleneck in some cases. In cases of large API programs, that team becomes a bottleneck for publishing APIs and for running successful API programs. So as a workaround for this bottleneck, we've seen large organizations adopt what we call a siloed API management model. In the siloed API management model, each API team in the organization is given their own API management service so that they can publish their APIs independently in their own API management service, control it, not run into conflicts with other teams, etc. But now that causes another problem, and that problem is that you have many multiple API management services in an organization. So the cost of maintaining those services increases. The governance aspects are harder and more difficult because you now have a single API platform team who needs to oversee 5, 10, maybe 50 API management services in the organization instead of just a single one. And then you also have a fragmentation of the API program, making it harder to apply unified monitoring of APIs, runtime policies, even unified discovery of APIs in the organization. So workspaces are a feature that's been in preview for several months now. They aim to solve that problem where you have a single API management service, just like in the centralized API management model. But then you also get the benefits of the siloed API management model. So with workspaces, a single API management service is partitioned across API teams in your organization. So each team in the organization, each API team gets their own slice of the API management service that they can develop their APIs in, productize those APIs, monitor the APIs, publish them to consumers, evolve the APIs, etc. While the API platform team still has a unified, centralized way to govern all the APIs in the organization and enable unified discovery of APIs. So the federated API management model gets the benefits of centralized and siloed API management models without their downsides. And workspaces are a way to implement that federated API management model in API management. So just to recap with workspaces, the platform team will be responsible for setting up workspaces for each API team in the organization and in an API management service. Most likely, each workspace will be backed by its own CI/CD pipeline. API platform teams will manage shared infrastructure, for example, gateway and the developer portal for unified API discovery, and they may enforce API policies and unify monitoring of API traffic in the platform to better govern the APIs in the organization. They may also implement organizational chargeback depending on the use of the service by certain API teams. API teams, on the other hand, are responsible for development, monitoring, productizing, etc., managing of APIs, and related resources inside their workspaces. So workspaces have been in preview, like I said, for several months now, and there are a few changes that we want to tell you about that are coming to the workspaces functionality. First of all, we are adding support for more resource types in workspaces. The current ongoing release of API management already includes supports for backends, certificates, loggers, and there will be more resource types that we'll be adding in the future, such as managed identity, credential manager, graphical resolvers, etc. The second change, the biggest change that's coming to workspaces, is that we are adding runtime isolation into workspaces. So going forward, after we announce runtime isolation, each workspace will run in a dedicated gateway or a dedicated process on a shared gateway. Okay, so with today model of workspaces, every workspace runs on the same built-in gateway in the API management service, which causes a lot of problems. First of all, it means that all the APIs share the same pool of computing resources. So if there is a single API that's misbehaving, causing troubles, causing starvation of resources, you are at risk of causing an outage for all of your APIs in the organization, regardless of which team owns these APIs. So that built-in gateway becomes a single point of failure for all your APIs in the organization. So that's problem number one. The problem number two is that once there is an issue going on with a certain API, you are not even able to attribute that issue to a specific workspace, a specific team in your organization. Because all the APIs share the same pool of resources, you can't tell which API is causing resource starvation in most cases. And not only you can't tell that, but we also can't tell that. So we can't help you, and we can't provide you the proper level of support with API management. So that runtime isolation will solve the problem of, it will remove that single point of failure of the built-in gateway, because now every workspace will run in its own dedicated gateway, so the issue will be contained to the dedicated gateway, or at least to a process on a gateway that's shared with other workspaces. And if you see a single, a process consuming too many resources, causing troubles, in drastic cases, you can just shut down that process, which will affect, a single workspace instead of affecting other APIs in the organization. Gateway resource will be a new Azure resource that you will be able to create in the Azure portal, or of course programmatically as well, and you will be able to link it to a workspace in the API management service. It will support auto-scaling, and the control plane will be independent from the API management service. So today, in API management, we do not support auto-scaling for secondary regions. With that gateway resource, auto-scaling will be supported regardless of where that gateway is provisioned. With regards to control plane isolation or independence from API management, it means that the control plane will be located basically where you deploy that gateway resource. So if your API management service is in East US and you deploy a gateway in West US, and then a disaster happens and East US region goes down, you will still be able to scale up or down your gateway in West US because it has its own control plane in the West US region. So that's what's coming in terms of runtime isolation for workspaces. As a side effect of that, there will be a change that you will need to navigate that's coming when we announce that runtime isolation, which means that each workspace associated with a gateway will have its own unique hostname. So that's something you need to keep in mind, especially if you are using workspaces today or if you plan to use workspaces in the future. I also want to mention several breaking changes that we are announcing or will announce for Workspaces preview. The first set we announced a couple of weeks ago, which reduces the availability of workspaces across tiers and simplifies the data model of workspaces. And the second change, like I just said, is that you will have to migrate to use runtime isolation of workspaces as soon as runtime isolation is available. So keep that in mind if workspaces is something that you're interested in using or already use it today. Keep in mind those features that are coming up and also the breaking changes. Are there any questions? When can we expect the API workspaces functionality to be in GA? We are working on the general availability. We are working on implementing the runtime isolation. I do not have a timeline to share publicly here today, but I don't expect it to happen sooner than 4 months from now. Are workspaces available in all pricing tiers? No. Workspaces are available today, after we announced the breaking changes, are available in the premium V1 tier, the original premium tier. And they will also be available in the V2 tiers, Premium V2 and Standard V2, potentially, and definitely Premium V2 and potentially Standard V2. Since workspaces are being removed from the developer tier, how do you suggest developing workspaces when most customers have a developer tier on dev and premium prod and test? Well, there are a few approaches you can take here. The first one is to use, of course, a premium tier service in the development environment. And then basically every workspace in that premium service is sort of like your developer service, right? So instead of having multiple developer services, you have a premium service, and it doesn't only need to be for a development environment. With workspaces and with runtime isolation, you can pack all non-production environments into a single service and all production environments into another service. So you can rethink how you partition those environments across API management services. Alternatively, you will be able to use Standard V2 as well, or Premium V2, which may be more cost-effective in your case. One more approach that you may consider, but you may run into some issues there, is to use developer tier services for the environment and then migrate the contents of a developer service to a workspace in a premium service in a production or test environment. So that's another approach, but there are some cases where you can run into issues with this approach. Will API Hub support workspaces? Yes, we are working on introducing API support for workspaces. It's probably going to come after general availability, but that's something on our radar. All right, I don't see any more questions, so I'll move on with the slides and I'll answer the rest of the questions in the chat. Andre?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So we announced Microsoft Copilot for Azure during Ignite in November. And Microsoft Copilot for Azure is basically an intelligent assistant that you have in the Azure portal, which helps you with any questions that you might have related to Azure. So you can see this on the screen on the right. You have this little chat window where you can ask questions. So we introduced Azure API Management with Microsoft Copilot for Azure from day one. And we introduced two new skills to this Copilot. So first is authoring. So we call it a generate policy skill. So what you can do with Microsoft Copilot for Azure today, when you are in the policy editor in the Azure API Management, you can ask Copilot to generate some policies for you, and it will produce a policy snippet which you can copy and paste in your policy configuration. So you can ask like, hey, I want to have a rate limiting policy of 10 requests per minute, or I want to have some policy that removes a header from my response of an API. You just ask Copilot to do that, and it will generate a policy for you. And the second skill that we introduced is explain policy. And this is extremely helpful where you have a policy that you're not that familiar with. Maybe you're not the one who created this policy, or maybe you just, I don't know, there is a colleague who left the company, and you need to understand what's going on there. So what you can do with explaining capability is you can select the policy, part of a policy in the policy editor. You can right-click right in the editor, and you can ask Copilot to explain it to you. And what's nice about it is it not only refers to the documentation and saying, like, for example, you have validate JWT policy. It will not just share that, oh, that is used for validating JWT. It will also look at the policy expressions. It will also look at the parameters that they have and all of the kind of named variables that you use. It will try to understand, and it will explain to you what this kind of a complicated policy expression does in a plain English. Now, the third scenario, which we discovered recently, which works pretty well with existing skills, is converting policies. So if you have a policy from another vendor, you can bring it to Copilot and ask it to convert it to Azure API Management policy. Sometimes it's not very accurate because, of course, we trained it on our policies. It's not really that familiar with policies from other vendors. However, it can still give you an idea that this policy is equivalent to, I don't know, for example, set header policy in Azure API management. And then you can go back to the first skill, which is authoring, and ask Copilot to generate policies using set header. So what's important to note here is that currently Microsoft Copilot for Azure is available through the sign-up form. So if you want to use it, you need to go through this process. And then when you have it, and I encourage you to use it for authoring, for explaining policies. And what's important here is that we ask you to leave feedback. And you can do that with those thumbs up and thumbs down buttons in the bottom of the at the bottom of the Copilot chat window. And there you will be asked, like, what went wrong? Maybe it's an accurate policy, maybe there was something offensive. And there will be a checkbox to share the conversation with us. And I will really appreciate if you do that, because that's the only way how we can get feedback to improve the Copilot experience for you. Now, there is a short demo available on this channel. It's a 5-minute video where I show how you can use Copilot to generate policies, to explain policies. So if you are interested, please take a look at this. So let me see. Looks like we don't have any questions for Copilot, so let me move to the gRPC. So recently we announced the support for gRPC APIs and API management. Currently, we have a public preview running for self-hosted gateway. And when we were developing gRPC support and API management, we wanted to bring the full support of gRPC. So at the moment, you bring your protobuf file, you bring your protobuf DB definition to Azure API management. You do it through the same way that you import your OpenAPI APIs, GraphQL APIs, or data APIs. And then when it comes to gRPC, we support all of the operation types you have in gRPC. So we support unary request, we support client streaming, we support server streaming, and we also support bidirectional streaming. And then once you imported your gRPC API, you can use all of the kind of old policies that we have, like you can apply rate limiting, you can validate tokens, and so on. So basically, this provides you a way to easily integrate your gRPC APIs into the single API management platform. So yeah, it seems like we don't have any questions, and let me hand it over to Julia.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, let's take it away with Azure API Center. So Azure API Center is the newest addition to our API platform offering here at Microsoft. We are currently a new Azure service. We are currently in public preview on our road to GA. But yeah, let me take a step back first to explain a little bit where we are coming from, what is the reasoning behind the product, and also show you a few little demos here. All right, so if we look at the role of APIs, we are still seeing a huge growth in the areas across different organizations, across different companies, across the different industries. A lot of organizations still believe that investments in APIs will either remain steady or increase over the next years, especially because APIs are seen as the driver of innovation. They are very important for any business operations and help with efficiency and also sustainability. So yeah, as we can see, APIs are just growing, but with this growth, a lot of challenges also come. One of the biggest challenges, and whenever we talk to our customers out there, is definitely the transparency in their API landscape. APIs are starting to grow across different services, across different management solutions. So really having this one solution that gives them better transparency into their API ecosystem for discoverability, but also reusability purposes here. We also do understand not every API is being managed. So if we go back one more slide, Mike, we do understand not every API is managed, but for some organization, they want to, at some point, come to the stage where they either have all of the APIs managed, but for them to have a tool that gives them better transparency, gives them a way to figure out which of the APIs are managed and which not. Another big layer and another big challenge is API governance. So something we are seeing is inconsistency in API designs, especially if some of the APIs are not even being that transparent. If organizations are just finding out about some APIs, API design is one of the first questions that are being asked. Of course, we also understand from a security and compliance perspective, shadow API or undiscovered APIs is also another big challenge that we are seeing. And with all of these challenges, somewhat efficiency can definitely have a downside on it. And we want to improve API productivity here. So discovering these APIs across the organization is definitely something that we want to help organizations here with. And this is where Azure API Center comes in. Azure API Center is your centralized API inventory solution for discovery and consumption purposes, and also for API governance. And we don't care where your API is being deployed, what type of API it is, which lifecycle stage it is in. The idea of Azure API Center to bring in all of your APIs across your organization and to get better transparency into your API landscape. So let's take a look at what are some of the different layers. Before we jump into some of the layers, let me also clarify, because it's one of the questions we do get asked from customers, what's the difference between API management and API Center? So API management, on the one hand, it's a gateway solution. So API management is your runtime API governance solution. So you can expose these APIs securely at scale. You can monitor their health and also analyze their usage. They have functionalities like applying policies, for example, for the API governance at runtime. API Center, on the other hand, which I already mentioned, we are the centralized inventory solution. So we look at API governance from a design times perspective. We want to give you and provide you a tool where you can collect and maintain these organizational APIs and really get more information about and gather more information about your API landscape here. So whenever I talk about Azure API Center, we have three big themes coming with our product. One is the centralized API inventory solution. So we want to give you the tool that helps you quickly register APIs, maintain this API inventory solution, and add additional custom metadata to it to really get a better transparency, a better tool on what are all of the APIs out there within my organization. The next big layer is API governance, as I mentioned, and more from an API design standpoint. So one is we are giving you the tool to customize your Azure API Center and apply so-called custom metadata so you can store additional information on top of your APIs. Another tool, and it's one of our newest feature, is we are enabling API linting capabilities in API Center. So you can check your API designs, all of the API designs that you have within your organization, within your Azure API Center, and check if they are following certain standards and certain rules. And the last layer that comes with Azure API Center is API discovery and API consumption. So for this, we also have a API Center portal that comes with the product. Here, the big differentiator between API management and API Center is our core focus audience is internal developers. That's why we are also offering another consumption and discovery tool, which is built into our IDEs. So we have a Visual Studio Code extension here. But yeah, now we talked a lot about what are the different layers of Azure API Center. So for this reason, I brought a demo. So let's take a look what Azure API Center looks like.
Let's take a look and explore Azure API Center. Azure API Center is your centralized inventorying solution for all of your organizational APIs. It helps you keep track of your API landscape for discoverability, reusability, and governance reasons. It is easy to register new APIs in API Center. Using our API CLI extension, you can easily add a new API version, a definition, and upload any API spec. To get a better understanding of your API landscape, you might want to store additional information about your APIs. Either via the portal or via CLI, you can modify your custom metadata. For any API in your inventory, you can update and change these additional information. API Center is all about easy discovery of your APIs. The API Center portal is a web-based interface that allows you to browse, search, and filter the API inventory. You can also view the details of each API, such as its version, definition, and deployment. Developers will be the main consumers of our API inventory. That is why we want to meet them where they already are and make the discovery experience as integrated as possible. In VS Code, I currently have 3 options what I can do with these APIs. As you can see, we are rendering Swagger UI into VS Code to visualize and interact with the APIs. If you have access to this API, you can even test this API right within VS Code. But you can also generate an HTTP file and interact with the HTTP file for testing or exploring capabilities. You can even modify the file based on your needs and send a request to your endpoint. Again, you will see an immediate response right within VS Code. And lastly, you can generate an API client based on your API for consumption reasons. For this, we are leveraging Kyoda that will help us generate our API client. You can pick and choose which operations you want to include in your API client. As soon as your API client was generated, you're now able to start developing and integrating with this API without having to write a single line of code.
Awesome. Now that I showed you what the product looks like right now, I also want to talk about our latest feature additions. As I mentioned, Azure API Center is all about your API design governance. So that's why we recently added API design conformance capabilities in Azure API Center as well. So we help you with your API linting within Azure API Center. So what does it mean? We essentially want to help you or give you a tool that helps you analyzing your API definitions and make sure that whatever rules, whatever standards you have defined, the APIs are following. And you can check if these APIs are conformant or if you need to make any changes or updates here as well. But yeah, let me also show a short little video on that as well.
API governance is the practice of defining and applying standards, policies, and processes. To facilitate robust API governance, we are excited to introduce API analysis in Azure API Center. API analysis utilizes API linting, a technique that validates your API specifications against a predefined set of rules or standards. I went ahead and previously defined my rules in a YAML file. I can customize these rules based on my organizational needs and requirements. For my demo, I went ahead and defined 1 warning and 1 error message. After this, I only have to deploy these rules as an Azure function. Next, I need to link these rules to my Azure API Center. This can be done in my API Center via events, where I went ahead and successfully linked these rules. So now, every time a new API definition gets uploaded, we will trigger a linting engine based on your rules and validate your APIs. Let's go ahead and upload a new definition for my Star Wars API. This will also trigger my API linting engine. Next, I can go to the API Analysis tab under Governance, and here I can see an overview of all the APIs, and I can see an overview report of which APIs are showing error or warning or informational messages. I can also get a more detailed analysis of my APIs. Whenever I click on my API definition, I will be redirected to this particular API, and via the Analysis tab, I'm now able to see a detailed report. It even shows me where this error or warning occurs within my spec. This makes it easy for me to resolve the issues.
Awesome. Before I'm handing it back to Mike and the team, let's talk a little bit about our roadmap also moving forward. So API governance, and with adding the capabilities of API linting and API Center, we are definitely very exciting to introduce API governance features within Azure API Center. Also moving forward, this is definitely going to be one of the big layers that comes with Azure API Center. As I mentioned, we are currently a product in public preview on our way to general availability, which is currently set for end of May, so around the Microsoft build timeline. This being said, we are always looking for feedback or any kind of questions around the product, which is a beauty of being in public preview. We are always iterating on the product itself, trying to make it fit for all of the customer needs out there. So please, whenever you have feedback or if you're interested in the product itself, let us know. Feel free to reach out here. We are always interested in staying connected with our customers out there. And now back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Julia. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so let me show them up here. You mentioned that API Center is focused on internal APIs, especially with the developer portal. There's a question, why is that focused on internal APIs only?
Yeah, great question. It's definitely one of the questions we do get and we do hear from a lot of customers. API Center is how we see the product. It is a tool for internal API platform teams. So our current focus is internal APIs for the reasoning, of course, for the scenarios to be a little bit more simpler, especially if we think about the discovery and exposabilities of these APIs. So not being said that this might not change in the future as well, but that's the current focus or the current scope of the of Azure API Center. So it can definitely be expanded in the future. And it's also some of the conversations we are having with the team, but we kind of had to start somewhere. So that's why we did start and focused on internal APIs, especially with introducing a lot of the API governance features, which mainly have an internal use here or an internal reasoning, especially for the API platform teams. So that's why we started with internal APIs first.
Awesome, thank you. The second question is, will it be possible to test APIs in the API Center portal?
Mm-hmm. Another great question. So currently, because customization or adding more functionalities in the API Center portal as well has been a huge request as well. So moving forward, we are looking into solutions where we will provide the API Center portal as an open source solution as well. So this means customers can then go and customize, add more capabilities themselves and be depending on the needs and requirements they have within their organization as well. So this is looking forward what we will provide and how to enable and give you all the flexibilities or customization you need as well. So definitely something that can be added in the future here too.
Awesome. Another question about the roadmap for API discovery. Based on, is there any plans for schema data graph along API compositions?
Mm-hmm. I hope I do understand the question correctly, but I'm assuming it is about API dependencies. So currently, if you want to, let's say, log different dependencies across your API landscape, this can be done using custom metadata. It is another requirement that keeps coming up. So we are investigating into providing, for example, functionalities or capabilities where you can create this, data graph that maps out all of the different APIs that are related to each other. It's not there yet in terms of the feature, but yeah, I love the question. Thank you, Marco.
I think, the way I understand it is you define a specific data contract, like for example, order data contract. And then you can reuse the data contract across multiple endpoints in a single API or multiple endpoints across several APIs. And then being able to discover APIs or endpoints that use that contract across your whole API portfolio.
I see, yeah. So it's definitely something that with the schema data, we do have custom metadata. So there is a way to search for certain, let's say, groups or certain types of APIs. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting use case. We haven't looked at it yet.
All right. The next question is about pricing. I don't know if we have pricing publicly available today.
Not right now. So we are currently in discussions with business planning around pricing. So this is something that is going to change for GA. I'm not allowed at this point to share any concrete pricing details. I think what I'm able to share is that we are looking at a tier model. And yeah, as soon as we have some information out there, I'm, of course, always eager to share these news with the community as well.
Perfect. And Julia is one of your fans.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, always. I like demos.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words of encouragement. Another question or more feedback around using your functions for governance validations. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good comment. We are definitely investigating in how we can make it easier for customers to just natively enable API linting capabilities. As of right now, we do have a dependency on also deploying Azure functions. It comes with it always comes with pros and cons. One of the pros is definitely this way we are giving customers a lot of flexibilities in how they want to define the guidelines, how they want to define the standards, because under the hood right now we are using Spectral, and Spectral can be as easy as only having a YAML file where you define all of the rules, but it can also be as complex as adding custom function. So the Spectral linting engine will then work. So with the concept, and for us reliant or dependent on Azure function, we definitely give our customers a lot of flexibility. So whatever rules you have currently within your organization, we are giving you a way to just apply them, so you don't have to modify them to make it fit for however we define it in API Center. But yeah, we definitely do understand that it comes with cons as well, such as operational dependencies here. And moving forward, our goal is definitely to make this easier.
Perfect. And that's it for API Center comments or questions. So thank you, Julia, very much for your presentation. Awesome. The next section will show a guest session from Stefan Eskens, who is an Azure MVP. It will be around designing an active global API platform and injecting some chaos into it to see how it performs and how the resiliency happens. So that part will take around 17 minutes. You can post your questions in the chat, and then after that, we'll wrap up, go to the last segment of our today's live stream, which is the Q&A, where you'll have opportunity to ask any questions or post comments or provide feedback. And after that, we'll just wrap up the live stream. So I'll jump into the presentation.
Hello, welcome to this session about designing an active global API platform. So I'm Stefan Eskens, I'm an Azure MVP. So let's get started. So our scenario for this, I'll be demoing this basically. Our scenario is about a global API platform. So active, as I said, so meaning that we want to have a multi-region deployment and both regions active at the same time, right? In this case, I would be choosing US and EU. This is inspired from a Wheel and Word project where we had the 3 continents, right? Or even Asia. So API consumers should be sent to the fastest location. So if a US user or consumer, let's say, consumes our APIs, we want to send him to the, let's say, US backend. And if it's EU, then of course it should be sent to the EU backend. Actually, it's the fastest location, but it is typically the closest as well. So the platforms must be resilient against adverse events. So if anything in the chain is actually failing, then the platform should be smart enough to send the user to the other location. So basically to the available location. And also we need to try to adhere to the enterprise-grade security practices. Okay, so that's basically what I'm going to show you today. So I will first walk you through a design very briefly before really seeing this in action. So that's the design. It's a bit too small, so I'll just stop this one and take a picture so that we can zoom in into the design. So first of all, high-level view, I'm zooming out here just to show you that we have 2 regions, EU at the top, US at the bottom, and our entry point is front door. I'll explain a little bit rationale behind front door. And then on the EU side, we have our master API management instance, right, primary region, and another gateway unit in the US. And then you have, of course, the backend stack, let's say, in each side. And basically, at the end of the chain, we have Cosmos DB, which is also spanning multiple regions, so EU and US, in multiple rights. So meaning that if you are in EU, you will actually connect to the EU Cosmos DB, and if you are in US, you're going to be connecting to the US one. So again, in case the happy path would be, if I'll zoom in a little bit here, happy path would be if I'm in EU here, I consume an API, I hit front door sends me to the EU location. Appim is doing, some checks. We'll come back to that a little later. And then Appim forwards traffic to the EU backend, which in turn will write ultimately some documents into the Cosmos database. And same, of course, for US. And in case of adverse event, we should actually see the US user being sent to EU and vice versa. And again, adverse event could be anything, right? So could be Appim is not available in EU, could be a backend is not available, could be the Cosmos DB is not available for some reason. So anything that could basically make it fail should then alert the platform to basically send the user to the other location. So let's zoom in a little bit. So our entry point is front door. The reason why I took front door here is because front door is multi-region aware, and front door will bring you some extra capabilities compared to just having APIM alone. So front door will basically offer you, of course, have to pay for the service, but you will have the ability to use the WAF policy, so web application firewall, meaning that you will be protected against typical OWASP top 10 attacks, but also any custom rule that you could actually enforce, right? So you're not limited to the OWASP top 10. Then in front door itself, we can define the load balancing algorithm. So that's really an added value. So in my design, I have two regions here. So, but we could imagine that if we had an extra country that we should add that does not belong to EU nor US, and maybe I might be forced for regulatory reasons or whatever reason to actually send that specific country traffic to a certain backend. And always, right? Not especially the fastest, but just one backend that I have decided. With front door, I have this possibility. If I would use API management alone, which could also be external facing, then API management would be based on DNS load balancing because it's actually using a traffic manager behind the scenes, meaning that it will always take the fastest location, right? So I could not enforce specific behavior. So the added value of having front door on top is first WAF, and secondly, the fact that I have full control over the, let's say, load balancing. Something important here, the health checks. So from front door, you will typically run health probes to make sure that the backends are healthy. As you might have seen here, I'm using a subscription key, so meaning that I have a health check endpoint in an API here defined in Appim, and my goal is to push the health probe up to the backend. And the reason why I'm not using API management's health check endpoint is because API management might be healthy, but maybe my backend is not, right? So I want really to make sure that the backend itself is really healthy or not, and then let front door know about it, right? If I just use the health check endpoint from Appim, well, I might just have a disconnect between the health of Appim and the health of my backend, which is the actual backend where ultimately the request will be forwarded to. Okay, we move on to the, let's say, to the right. So of course, between EU and US, this is more or less the same. So I'll just focus on EU. So I've got API management and I'm using the premium pricing tier. And the reason why I'm using premium pricing tier is because I want to adhere to the strictest security practices. So meaning that all my resources here are fully private. So Appim needs to be able to talk to, let's say, private backends. And also, I want to control the way traffic flies into Appim. So in this case, I have premium integrated external mode. So it's VNet integrated in external mode. And the reason why it's external mode is because at this stage, so as of, let's say, April 2024, front door is not able to see a private API management instance. So you need a public inbound VIP. So even if you use premium. Now, I can, of course, lock down the traffic to front door. How do I do that? By using network security groups, where I first admit some traffic or accept some traffic that are just part of prerequisites from API management. And I also whitelist the front door service stack that you see here. So front door service stack means any front door in the world, right? But on top of this service stack, which will already narrow down who can talk to my API management instance, I also add a policy in API management to restrict traffic only from my front door. That's important to combine both to make sure that only your front door can do that. And that's just by validating this HTTP header that is written by front door itself, right? So front door will always add this HTTP header, remove if anyone tries to play with it, and basically inject its own identifier, which is unique worldwide. And then I'm keeping the identifier in Appim config, and then I just compare if there is a match. Of course, the level of Appim itself, I also do some validation checks, like validating that I have a correct token. I can do some rate limiting, and that's typical policies that you should always put whenever possible, basically. And then I'm routing traffic to the backend. So in the backend itself, it's just a web app, also VNet integrated, so private endpoints enabled, and outbound traffic integrated to VNet injection. And then basically my web app will just talk to private endpoints of Cosmos. So I can't really elaborate more in such a short amount of time about how Cosmos DB private endpoints work. But basically here, the goal is to say that in the EU, I will leverage all these private endpoints for all regions, being EU, US, and on both sides, basically. And then the third private endpoint is just the main, let's say, Cosmos DB name. Yeah, so that's about it for the design. So let's see this in action. So now I have, let's say, 4 tabs here. So let's quickly check the config of front door. So we see that as per the design, I have, let's say, my domain here. So it's a custom domain targeting the front door domain. If I look at the origin group, which is the most interesting part on the front door side, I have indeed my 2 regional gateway units, right? West Europe and US. So if I would have to, let's say, add a third region, I would, of course, have to add this origin in the group as well. And I'm targeting to this health check endpoint, as I explained. So that's, let's say, for the origin group. And I'm using the latency 0, meaning that it will always take the fastest, let's say, backend by design. That's for front door, so quite easy. And also something that you might have seen, I have also my WAF policy that is associated to this, let's say, endpoint. So that's for front door. So if I go to APIM, we see that, first of all, I'm using 2 locations, West Europe, North Central US, that I'm in premium. Right, I could have used also availability zones and so on, which would increase the resilience. But of course, for cost savings purposes, I decided to stick to 1 gateway unit in each region. But you can, of course, also leverage availability zones just to make it more resilient. So I have my APIs here. So for the demo, I just have 1 single API with 1 version. And what I'm doing here is that for, let's say, this operation here, I basically have the following policy, the one that you saw in the design. So basically, JWT validation, you make sure that you are authenticated before you can consume the API. And I'm basically routing the traffic to the EU backend or to the US backend, as you can see here. My backends are just recorded here, and my backends are nothing else but my web apps, right? The URLs of my web app. That's about it. So for the, let's say, health, let's say, API, I have this health check here. And so, what I do here, I do the same. Basically, I just route traffic to the EU or US backend, and it will basically forward this to the health check endpoint of the web apps themselves. Okay, so it's up to the backend to say if it is, let's say, healthy or not. And in the old API, so that applies to everything here, I also have a check on the front door identifier just to make sure that front door is indeed talking to me. Then the last, not really the last, so the backend side, so just on the VNet EU side, sorry, I have my VNet with all these subnets, and where, of course, I have my API gateway and so on. And I have, of course, as you can see here, so I'll just come back to this one, I have some security groups, right, which allow and deny traffic as illustrated in the diagram. My Cosmos DB, so that's the last, let's say, service in the chain. So I've got 2 regions as well. So as you can see here, North Central US and West Europe, in multiple right regions. So everything is ready. So let's try it out now. Okay, so I'll just bring my Postman on screen here, and so I already prepared some queries, of course. So first thing, I want to make sure that everything is locked down. As I told you, we must adhere to enterprise-grade security practices, so nothing should be public, and I want to control, let's say, where the traffic is flying through. So if I try to directly call the EU backend, I'll have a 403, right? Because I'm using private endpoint and I have denied public traffic. Same for US, so 403 as well. If I try to hit the gateway unit directly, as I told you, my API must be external facing because front door cannot see it if it's private. So then still I have locked it down through NSG rules. So here you see it's the NSG already entered into play. So the request is just pending and it will just time out. So I can just stop it. So I cannot consume API directly, as you can see. If I do the same with US, I got, the EU in this case, sorry, I was in the US. It's the same, I cannot call it directly. So then the only possible path is front door. So if I try to call my API straight away, from front door, I'll have a 401 because API verifies that I provide a valid token. So I will not enter details here, but that's typically, again, something you should try to enforce in every API management solution to some sort of authorization mechanism. So I'll first request a token to enter ID in this case. This token is now saved into a variable in Postman. I'll reuse that variable from this call here. And basically, if I do the call again, I will have, let's say, well, it will succeed. So here, I'm in my backend service code, I'm extracting which Cosmos DB, let's say, location was used to write the document. And as you can see here, I'm in the, my laptop is in EU because I'm close to Brussels here. And so front door redirects me to or forwards my traffic to the EU location as expected. And indeed, my EU backend, you see this is the EU backend, is writing to Cosmos, right? And it's leveraging the Cosmos, the EU, Cosmos DB region. If I look inside of Cosmos, I can actually come back to this one. I didn't show you that my Cosmos is also itself locked down. So if I try from my home laptop to basically see what's inside, right? If the document has been written, then I'll be denied, basically, as you can see here, simply because I'm trying to go through internet and this is denied. Now I'll just switch and go to a US-based virtual machine that is in the US region, US VNet, let's say, that I showed. And basically here, if I do the same check, because I'm in the right network perimeter and I'm resolving the private endpoint of the Cosmos DB, then I can see what's inside, right? And we see that indeed the document was just created by my API call, right? So if I do a few other calls, like 2, 3, and I come back, then you'll see that my documents will be here. Where are you? Refresh. Yeah, it's here, sorry. You see, and so here I've got indeed, I clicked only once, but I've got indeed, let's say, a second document I could create. So happy pass, I'm in the EU, everything is flying, all EU, let's say, from scratch. So now I'm on the US VM, right? So if I try to do the same call, not from Postman, I'll just do that from API, from a PowerShell, but it's going to be the same result. I'll first request a token, and then I'll just, let's say, write a record here. So I'll just stop the loop just to see if it works. As you can see here, I made one call. I'm then backend was picked up. So that front door sent my traffic to was the US backend, and the US backend has used the North Central US region of Cosmos DB, which is exactly what I want. So if I check here, if the record or document has been created, I have my indeed US document here. So far, so good. So as per our scenario, the platform should be resilient. So let's try to inject some chaos. And to do that, because of course we cannot just stop a region in Azure, so that we have to live with also some assumptions. So we can just test what is possible to test. But to test it out, I'll just run this loop here. So you see here, I'm writing documents in loop, like every 3 seconds, to my Cosmos DB, and you see that now it's going to the North Central US region. So to create chaos, what I'll do is that I'll basically disable the multi-region write. Right, so here I'm disabling this, meaning that I still have 2 regions, but only EU is writable. So that's going to update. It might take a minute or 2. And so if I come back here, at some point, so first of all, you can see that it still works right now. Okay, Cosmos is still, or the US region is still in use because Cosmos has not yet really removed that yet. Okay, so but it will switch at some point, right, to the EU region without you noticing, basically, right? So and at the same time, if I switch back to my host, run again a query using Postman or from EU, then it will still work and still send me to the EU location. So here it should at some point switch. So the problem at some point is a matter of seconds or sometimes minutes, but it should switch seamlessly to the West Europe region, and it just did it, right? So here you can see here that now my backend, which is still the US backend, so I'll just stop the loop, by the way, my US backend is actually, so front door still redirects me to US, right? Because from a front door perspective, there is no issue, right? You cannot see that the Cosmos region is down, let's say, or not writable anymore. But it's an application level resilience here. So my code in my backend is leveraging the Cosmos DB SDK, which is smart enough to swap the regions in case this is needed, right? So basically here, I'll just stop it. Okay, and so you could see that this is one way to have something resilient is just by, let's say, relying on the application resilience itself. And Cosmos DB is great from that perspective, and the Cosmos DB SDK is great as well. So that's one type of chaos, of adverse events that could happen, right? And you could see it in action that was working fine. So now I'll actually create another type of chaos, and I will restart. So first clear out the screen, restart my loop, and right now I will actually stop the US backend. So I'll stop this one. And so now I will have some issues at some point, right? So here you see that front door is still sending me to US. Okay, so we see that now it took a bit of time, but now the EU backend, so front door is well sending me to the EU backend, although I'm based in the US, right? So it took a good 2 minutes, I think, today. Again, the time it takes could vary, but overall, you might also still consider that if you have a full regional outage, if you're out of business for 2 minutes, honestly, that's still very short, right? So that's how you have to see it, because I just stopped the backend, but it will not take longer actually to front door to detect the full region is down, because it will still probe the same location, right? So stopping the backend here is not exactly, of course, equivalent to stopping the full region, but we cannot stop the full region. So we can fairly assume that if basically you have a real regional outage, front door being global, It would not take longer than 2 minutes, maybe less. So sometimes it takes like even only 20 seconds, right? So, but you will have some failures. So don't expect to have zero failure. That's also almost impossible, because of course the probing mechanism is not always up and running. So we can see that, okay, in the end, ultimately, this is just working well from both sides. So although I have stopped my US backend, of course, you will have a higher latency. That is also to be expected. And in this case, you have a much higher latency because I did not re-enable the Cosmos DB right in the US. So I have a round trip from US to the EU gateway unit of APIM, and so the EU backend. And then I have also my and that noise indeed writing to the right Cosmos DB location, right? So if in case you have an issue, the only thing you will observe could have some failures, as you could see here, and then an extra latency, of course, because you are crossing 2 continents. So of course you cannot expect the same speed, but at least it's still up and running quite fine. So that's it about the demo and some resilience aspects I wanted to show you. Thank you for watching this video.
Thank you, Stefan. Fantastic demo, very informative. This is just an example how you can design, architect, and implement a resilient active-active global API management platform, and how you can inject some chaos to make sure that it is in fact resilient and it's able to overcome regional failures and disasters. There is a couple of questions before we go to the last section here. The first one is your demo API management service injected in VNet? And the second question is, how did you overcome Azure front or private endpoint limitation? Stefan's API management service was injected into VNet in the external mode, so that founder could still reach out to the API management service via the public address because of the external mode of VNet. But the communication from API management to the backend was within the virtual network. And I'll take the other question about multi-region in just a minute. Let me go to the last section here. If you have any questions or comments or feedback, please post them in the chat. We'll stay here for a few minutes and see if any questions flow in. I also want to remind you about the next event that we'll be organizing, the live stream event. It's likely to happen sometime in June. We'll be posting about it on our blog, so you can check out the blog link here on the left-hand side of the site, or you can just follow the Microsoft Azure Developers channel on YouTube, where you will see that our live stream will be scheduled probably around 2 weeks in advance. We would love to hear your feedback about this event, what you liked, what you didn't like, what we can improve on in the future. So please take a minute to fill the form that's on the right-hand side of the site. It's available either via the link, or you can scan the QR code to fill the form. It's completely anonymous, and you can fill whichever questions you feel comfortable with filling. So please take a moment to provide us the feedback, because that's the only way we can improve the future live streams. And now onto the question that we had. Instead of using API management multi-region deployment, is there a way to entirely sync content of 2 completely separate API management instances? Yes, there is a way to do it if you want to build a do-it-yourself solution where you just replicate all the configuration from one API management service to another API management service. But you need to keep in mind that you have to maintain that update process, that synchronization process yourself. You have to implement it yourself. You have to test it yourself. You have to make sure it doesn't experience an outage yourself. So there is a lot of work involved in keeping that synchronization working and up to date, that you get out of the box, that you don't have to worry about when you use the multi-region functionality of the Azure API management service that's built into API management. And yeah, please keep the questions coming. If there are no questions, we'll just conclude the stream in a couple of minutes. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time as well.